All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's share, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Nisan. Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating over Shuman Drushos this month in memory of Paul's parents, Shmuel ben Zechariah and Sarah bas Avram, and to thank Avram and Shani Kalman for dedicating the Shurim and Joshua this month in memory of Avram's mother, Sarah Braina bas Yoshua Heschel. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an Aliyah and the families Einacham. With that, let us begin. Today's daf is Yud Tes, and we are in Meretz Hashem picking up at the Mishnah in the new parak. I just wanted to close out just the halacha l'maisa. We left off again. We ran out of time yesterday. Baruch Hashem, and I didn't get a chance to do the Rambam at the end of the sugya. So remember, again, we left off in the end of the sugya discussing the idea about whether or not a woman could be subject to the Sotah process more than once. So if you remember, again, we had a couple of different variations of this question. So possibility one is, could she be subject to the Sotah process the same time within one marriage? And then that question was further broken down into, could she be subject to the Sotah process with the same man, right? The same suspected adulterer in the same marriage, or just different suspected adulterers within the same marriage? And again, if in the same marriage is not possible, what about in different marriages? In other words, is there such a concept that maybe a woman, once she is subject to the Sotah process once in her lifetime, that's it? Remember, the svara there would seem to be reflective of the opinion of Rabbi Meir, namely that once the Sotah waters are in her body, ultimately, again, they serve to check her even at a later date. So the Rambam Paskins, this is in Hilchos Sotah, Perek Aleph Halacha Yud Beis. The Rambam writes, Shasameh Hamarim V'Niksamehem V'Chazer V'Kinula Me'ish Yishka Al Yado V'Nistra Imo Ein Yochol Lashko Sa'al Yado Pam Shniya Ela Te'asar Alav V'Olam V'Teitz V'Lo Ksuva. So we'll say the way the Rambam Paskins is like this. Halacha L'Maisa, a woman can only be subject to the Sotah process with a particular suspected adulterer once within a marriage. So therefore, let's say Rachel's married to Ruvain. Ruvain warns her not to be alone with Shimon. She goes ahead and she violates the warning, triggers the Sotah process. She drinks the water, and let's say she's innocent. Then again, Ruvain warns her again about Shimon. She would not drink a second time for suspected adultery with the same man within the same marriage. However, but halacha l'maisa, if let's say again, the second time Reuven warns her about being alone with Levi, then l'maisa again, the Sotah process could be administered a second time. So bottom line, Rambam Paskins, the halacha l'maisa, essentially, it's only one Sotah process per suspected adulterer, right? You can't drink twice for the same suspected adulterer, but you can drink more than once in the course of one marriage, as long as it's different suspected adulterers each time. Okay, that's the Rambam Paskins. Good. Well, let's say with that, new Mishnah Tesson Aleph. How you know to less minchasa mitoch kafifa mitzvah. So if you remember again, continuing along in the process, the actual process of Sotah. So literally translated, he would take her mincha mitoch kafifa mitzvahs. So remember again, halacha l'maisa, the mincha itself of the Sotah, as we spoke about, is brought to the Beis Hamikdash in this reed basket. Remember again, back to the last parak. One of the fundamental distinctions we made between the Sotah's mincha and a regular mincha was what? Generally, when bringing a mincha from your home, how would you bring it? Right? Gold and silver baskets, right? So remember again, didn't have to actually be klisharis, but rather ra'i to be a klisharis. Sotah's mincha is brought in a very basic reed basket. Okay, so he would go ahead and he would take her mincha from the kfifa mitzvahs, the nostal l'soch kli sharis, and would go ahead and put it into a kli sharis, an actual service utensil. And I will say it's interesting to note, if you look at Rashi, Rashi says over Hayanotel as minchasa habal. It's actually quite interesting. Rashi understands, see, when you read the Mishnah, I don't know, I would automatically assume that who's taking the mincha and putting it into a kli sharis? The Kohen. But yet Rashi points out over here that it's actually, it could, in other words, it doesn't have to be the husband, but it could be the husband. Rashi points out, Deham rinan de'ein mitzvah skuna b'menachos ela mikamitza ve'elach v'hagosha nami trilas kamitzahi she'ein zar karev lemizbeach aval kiddush kli v'yitzika ubelila sheta'onos shemen kasher bezar. Actually, just a fascinating piece of information over here that technically speaking, it's really up until the point of Hagasha, of bringing the mincha close to the Mizbeach, all of that could be done by a zar, by a non-Kohen. So that technically speaking, when we speak about transferring the contents of the Kfifa Mitzris into a Kli Sharis, technically speaking, that can all be done by the husband. That could all be done by a non-Kohen. Okay, again, I will say, just to be clear, it doesn't mean it has to be done by the husband. The Mishnah is just teaching me it can be done by the husband. The transference of a karban mincha from a mundane utensil into a kli sharis does not require a Kohen. Fine. The nosna al yada, I will say, after, interesting enough, after it's transferred into a kli sharis, so ultimately he places the kli sharis on her hands, right? So she holds the kli sharis. The Kohen maniach yado mitachta. I will say, interestingly enough, it sounds like over here, the Kohen places his hands underneath her hands. Okay, we'll talk about that in just a moment. Heinif, so we'll say umanifa. And they wave, which literally means they move the kli sharis in different directions, what we call tenufa. Now we'll say, fine, so let's pause for just a moment. This is interesting about the Kohen putting his hands underneath her hands. So if you look at Tosas, the Kohen maniach es yado tachta, Tosas writes, Hay di'itzterich su lemisni the Kohen maniach es yado tachta, velo katoni bistam umachnis es yado, lashmo'inon de tenufa bekohen. Fine, you shall be fine. The Kohen maniach es yado tachta, ve'ein hadavar kior, maniach mapa ve'eino chotzetz. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, Tosas struggles with this as well. Tosas, how exactly is it that we're having the Kohen put his hands on top, or I should say underneath, of the Sotah's hands? Right? In other words, again, obviously a man touching a woman who is not his wife or not one of his direct blood relatives, clearly again is halachically problematic. So what's happening over here? So Tosas floats an idea that maybe ultimately there was a cloth between them. So the problem with the cloth, of course, is that would represent a chatzitza. The same way that a Kohen can't wear gloves when he does the avoda, so the use of a cloth would also be pashtos be problematic. So Tosas goes on, he says, maybe Kohen zaken. So it could be that it was an elderly Kohen who went ahead and did this avoda. Now, what's the chap with an elderly Kohen? That we assume that once a person reaches a certain age, so those taivas, those desires are a bit more diminished. So perhaps we went ahead and we dafka used an elderly Kohen for this particular avoda. Therefore, there's no concern about any kind of arousal, or no concern about any type of hirhur that would come about. Fine. Then Tosas says, "Vafilu tema Kohen yeled she'ein yetzer hara mitsuya l'sha'a." So I will say this is actually quite interesting. I will say then Tosas says maybe it was even just a regular Kohen, a young Kohen, and maybe there's just no yetzer hara in this moment. Whereas we'll say, what's the pshat with that? Maybe the pshat of that is like this. Remember, what's going on over here in this process? What's going on over here? So this is clearly a situation where the yetzer hara has gotten a little bit out of control. So there is such a concept like this where sometimes, again, people are so overwhelmed by the enormity of what it is that's unfolding that even the yetzer hara, which is normally a very powerful driving force within an individual, is a bit dormant or a bit restrained. So Tosas quotes three different possibilities as to how this is happening. Either the use of a cloth, which would seem to be halachically problematic, an old Kohen, the yetzer hara is not there, or even a young Kohen. But Lamaisa, I would say that lashon is so incredible. Ein yetzer hara, she'ein yetzer hara mitsuya l'sha'a, right? There's no Yetzer Hara l'sha'a. We'll say, what does l'sha'a mean? So, right, at that time, they will say, by the way, wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be great if that was true? Ein Yetzer Hara l'sha'a, right? That you could, that maybe there was just a few minutes where the Yetzer Hara was quiet, right? Just a few minutes where the Yetzer Hara was done, just a few minutes where he just left me alone. Ein Yetzer Hara l'sha'a. How fantastic. Okay, in any event, I'm just pointing out to you, it's intriguing, it's interesting, and it's not pashut. Fine, we'll talk about the Rambam with this a little bit later on if we have time. Fine, let's go back to Mishnah. So Omanifa, right? Heinif vehigish kometz vehiktir. So I'll say, so now, here's what's interesting about the order. So then it sounds like they do the waving. Higish, Rabbi say, ultimately means they bring the carbon mincha close to the Mizrach. Remember again, Rabbi say, a lot of this goes back to the previous Mishnayos we had, where remember again, you're taking remember from the previous Mishnah, little Chazara. Where are you taking the carbon mincha? Where's the carbon? When we talk about Hagasha, bringing it close to the Mizbeach, where is it going? Remember from the last Mishnah or last parak, right? Southwest corner, right? The raised southwest corner of the Mizbeach. Kamatz, you take the Kamitza. Hiktir, remember the Kamitza is offered up on the Mizbeach. Vashar ne'echal kohanim, and the rest ultimately again is consumed by the Kohanim. Fine. Haya mashke va'achar kach makriv es minchasa. Shabbos say, so here's what's interesting. Just the Mishnah says, but by the way, the proper order was first she would drink, and then the mincha would be offered. Then the mincha would be offered. Fine. Shabbos say, so take a look. Well, actually, we'll fine. Rabbi Shimon says, makriv es minchasa va'achar kach haya mashke. Rabbi Shimon disagrees. So we'll say, fundamentals machlokas Tanakama Rabbi Shimon. Tanakama holds that first drinking and then mincha. Rabbi Shimon holds first mincha and then drinking. What Rabbi say? What's the Tanakama's logic? First drinking, then mincha. It makes sense. Why? You don't want to offer up the carbon if she doesn't end up drinking, right? Lamaisa, if you offer up the carbon and then it turns out she doesn't drink, then technically speaking, you've just offered up, a mincha without bailam and mincha without owners. What's Rabbi Shimon's logic? Rabbi Shimon says, "Makri v'achar minchasa." Rabbi Shneemar v'achar yashkes ha'isha. Because I will say the pasuk says literally again, the achar yashkes ha'isha samayim says after what? So I will say the lashon of the pasuk is the kamatz hakoyim min minchas askarasa the hiktar mizbecha the achar. So it seems a pretty explicit pasuk. The Torah says you'll offer up the mincha the achar, and afterwards she will drink. So we'll obviously have to see what the Tanakama does with that pasuk. Im hishka v'achar hikr minchasa kshera. But halacha l'maisa again, if you went ahead and you gave her to drink first, and then you offered up the mincha, even Rabbi Shimon would agree that halacha l'maisa the mincha is kosher. Good. So we'll say, so let's analyze a little bit. Amarli Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yoshia didare. So Rabbi Elazar said to Rabbi Yoshia of his generation. Rabbi Elazar, just an interesting biographical Rashi here. Rabbi Yoshia didare, first Rashi in the Gemara. It's the fifth to last short line. Amorahu ubidarosh Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas. I will say this: he wasn't the Rabbi Yoshia that we are talking about was an Amora, and he lived in the generation of Rabbi Elazar. So Rashi goes on. He says, "Va'od hay Rabbi Yoshia shayatana arpulted Rabbi Yochanan bekule Gemara. V'haynu dikam Rabbi Yoshia didare. The lotema Rabbi Yoshia hazakim." The lav orach ara lememra lehachi shagadol v'zakim elohaya. So we'll say, interestingly enough, two Rabbi Yoshias, Rabbi Yoshia the Amora, Rabbi Yoshia the Tana. This conversation over here of Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas to Rabbi Yoshia is to Rabbi Yoshia the Amora, who was a contemporary of Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas. And I will say the reason why we have to identify the person is because look at the way Rabbi Elazar interacts with Rabbi Yoshia. Look what he says. Amar Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yoshia didarei lo tesav akarach ad mefarashas laha milsa. Do not sit down until you explain to me the following. Now I will say, so again, that's a strong lashon, right? Don't take your seat until you explain to me the following. So Limar just wants to point out, you should not chas v'shalom think that Rabbi Elazar is talking to the Rabbi Yoshia who is older than him. who is older than him. Why? Because that would be a sign of disrespect. He's talking to Rabbi Yoshia, who's a contemporary of his, and he's saying, don't sit down until you, since they're all saying, part of the beauty of Gemara, ultimately, again, is that Gemara teaches us so many things, not just with the stated halacha, but even just with the small interactions. In other words, the Gemara wants to make sure that you don't think that Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas is speaking to someone who is older than him in a non-deferential way. And I will say it's interesting how, I would say modes of respect change over time. Like, I'll tell you, growing up, I'm not an old person. Growing up, you never called someone older than you, like a friend of your parents, by their first name. You never called someone by their first name, right? It was always Mr., Mrs., never. It's fascinating to me, like today, it's so accepted that children call adults, like their parents, friends of their parents, peers, by their first names. Again, it's societal. So it's just fascinating how these norms, right? The norms changed. Respect norms. In general, respect is a difficult thing to find contemporarily. There's such an erosion of respect standards. So it's interesting that the Gemara is saying over here, this fascinating idea that Rabbi Elazar is saying to Rabbi Yoshia, don't sit down. Whoa, hold up. Just make sure we understand. It's not Rabbi Yoshia, his senior. He would never speak to someone older that way. This is Rabbi Yoshia, his peer, his contemporary, saying, listen, don't pull up a chair base medrash until you explain to me the following idea. It's interesting. So the Gemara says, I feel old now, like I get to talk about how things were when I was younger, right? When I was a kid, we never did it. Good. Gemara goes like that. So minayin leminchas sotah she tu'una tunufa. So he was asking the following question. From where do we know that minchas sotah requires waving? Remember, again, the Mishnah tells me that you waved the mincha of the sotah. So from where do we know that the mincha of the sotah requires tenufa? So menale vehenif ksibba. Well, the Torah says that you wave it. That's pretty obvious. To which the Gemara says, no, bebailin minayin. The fact that sotah needs tenufa, so that's an explicit pasuk. What we're asking is, normally vehenif, right, would mean the Kohen waves it. How do I know that there's an obligation for the owners to wave it together with the Kohen? To which the Gemara says, Asya yad mishlamim. So it's very interesting. There's a gzera shava of yad from shlamim. I will say, what's the gzera shava? Here we go. First of all, look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, by the way, I just want to point out, the bailim, Rashi also points out, is the isha. Right? Remember again, the husband's not waving, even though the husband was the one who was bringing the mincha to the Beis Hamikdash, the husband is not the one who's doing the tenufa with the Kohen, it's the wife, it's the Sotah who's doing the tenufa. So we're asking, from where do we know that tenufa is done with the owners and the Kohen? So the Gemara is learning from Shlamim. Look at Rashi Shlamim, mitnufas chazei v'shok ve'emur in the Shlamim. So I will say, when it comes to the Shlamim offering, so the waving process is done with the chest and the thigh and the sacrificial parts. So listen to this. Ksiv hacha, it says over here, v'lakach hakohen miyad ha'isha. Pasuk says over here by the mincha of the sotah, the Kohen will take it from the hand of the woman. Uksiv hasa, when it says by shlamim, yadav tivi'ena. So, and again, it uses the same notion of yadav by shlamim. What do we see from here? Makan Kohen, just like over here, ultimately again by the sotah, the Kohen is doing the tenufa. Af lahalon Kohen, so too by shlamim, it's also the Kohen. Umar lahalon bailim, and just like by shlamim, who's doing the tenufa together with the Kohen? It's the owners of the carbon. Afkan bailim, sotah over here by sotah. Ultimately, again, it's the owners. Hakesa. So how does that work? Maniach yodo tachas yedeha bailim umenif. The Kohen places his hands underneath the owner's hands, and they wave together. Says Rabbi Gzera Shava from Shlamim to Sotah to teach us that halacha lamaisa not only is tenufa being done, but tenufa is being done with the Kohen together with the owner of the carbon, in this case, the Sotah. Incredible. Henif, the Higish, Kamatz, Haya Mashke v'achar kach makriv es minchasa. Shabbos says, here's what's interesting. So remember again, the lashon of the Mishnah was, they did tenufa, they offered up the komets, then she would drink, and then they would offer up the mincha. So we'll say, so the Mishnah is inherently contradictory, because the way the Mishnah reads initially is it sounds like the mincha is being offered up when? Before she drinks. And then the Mishnah says the mincha is being offered up only after she drinks. So which one is it? To which the Gemara says, ha'akriva. I don't understand. You're making it sound like she drinks and then she goes in and offers up the mincha, but it sounds like from the Mishnah that the mincha was already offered. Hachi kamar, this is what it means to say. We'll say, here we go. Seder menachos ketzad. We'll say, what is the order of the mincha of the Sotah? So henif. Here's the process. I must say, obviously, we're lapping off the front part of the process, right? Because we already learned that. The front part of the process is it's brought in the reed basket to the Beis Hamikdash, and right, transferred into a kli sharis. We're skipping a little bit ahead. So now again, henif, tenufa, right, waving process. Hegish, they will say, what's hegish? Bringing the carbon near to the mizbeach. So remember again, that's before offering. There's the concept of hagasha, bringing the carbon close to the southwest corner of the Mizbeach. Next, kamatz, taking the kamitza, right, the 3 fingerfuls that's actually offered up. Hiktir, ultimately offering up of the kamitza. V'hashar, nechol kohanim. And then the rest is eaten by the kohanim. So that is the process for kamitza. Ubashkas, ubashka, Gufa pligi Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanan. I will say, so everyone agrees, right? Here's the great part. Everyone agrees on the process of the mincha. So what's the machlokes? The machlokes is where drinking comes in all of this, right? When does the drinking take place? Here we go. So that's pligi Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanan. That's the machlokes Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanan. The Rabbanan savri, the Rabbanan hold mashke v'achar kach makriv es minchasa. The Rabbanan hold ultimately again, she drinks, and then she offers up the mincha. Rabbi Shimon savar makriv es minchasa v'achar kach mashke shene'emar v'achar yashke. So Rabbi says fundamental machlokes. So the Rabbanan hold that ultimately again, first she drinks and then the mincha, and Rabbi Shimon holds that first she offers the mincha and then she drinks. Fine, Rabbi say we'll see the Rambam in this in just a moment. V'im hishka v'achar kach hikriv es minchasa kshera. Rabbi say it appears that even Rabbi Shimon, who normally says that first mincha and then drinking, agrees that if you drank first and then mincha, ultimately again you are still yotze. So I'll say Amud Beis. Let's analyze this a little bit. Amud Beis. Tanabanan. So I'll say, so the pasuk says v'hishka. Sorry, we should do the Rambam now. Okay, let's go a little bit weiter first. We'll do the Rambam in just a bit. So Tanabanan, the Hishka. So we'll say the pasuk says you'll give her to drink. Then we'll say, so remember again, the pashat pshat of the psukim seems to support Rabbi Shimon, namely that first mincha, and then drinking. So v'hishka, the pasuk says you'll give her to drink. Now the truth is that there's 2 times the Torah says v'hishka, you'll give her to drink, which obviously would seem to be repetitive. So matam lomar, why does the Torah have to say v'hishka again? V'alo kvar ne'amar v'hishka. It already told us that you give her to drink. So we'll say, so why the second v'hishka? Shemimcha ka megillah va'omeres eini shosa. Actually, I will say before we get to this, let me tell you the Rambam. Let's solidify the order over here, right? Because we have a fundamental machlokes between Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan. According to Rabbi Shimon, first mincha, then drinking. According to the Rabbanan, first drinking and then mincha. So how do we paskin? So the Rambam says, this is in Hilchos Sotah, Perek Gimel Halacha Tesvav, the achar kach mashke osa, the achar shetishte. Lo kleach kli shari sheboa mincha v'nosnu al yadeh v'akoy mariach yado tachtel umanifa b'mizrach, so on and so forth. So I'll say the Rambam paskins drinking and then mincha, like the Rabbanan, drinking then mincha. Fine. So I'll say, so now that we kind of have that out of the way, all right, let's go back. So the pasuk says like this. So why do you have to say v'hishka twice? I say v'hishka twice. To which the Gemara says that teach you, second line from the top, Yud Tesama base, 19b, Shemimcha ka megillah va'omeres eini shoser. So we'll say, watch this. What happens if the parchment was erased? And after the parchment was erased into the water, she says, I'm not drinking. I'm not drinking. So what's the halacha? Ma'arin osa umashkin osa bal karcha div Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says the second v'hishka says that what? If we already erased the parchment, she's drinking. Now we'll say, now ma'arin osa literally means like we push her. Like we strongly encourage her, which is going to mean we force her. We'll see. We'll discuss this in greater depth. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. Second, vehishka means that Allah even if after, so in other words, once we erased, no going back. No going back. We force her to drink. Rabbi Shimon says, the achar yashke. Now we'll say, so the pasuk says v'achar yashke, then she will drink. Ma tamud lomar. So why do you even need to say this? V'alo kavar ne'emar vehishka. It already said that you give her to drink. Ela la'achar kol ha'ma'asim kulon ha'amurin lamala. Now remember again, let's go back. We're going to be jumping back and forth over here between drashas. Rabbi Shimon is the one who said va'achar yashka means that what? Remember, when you look at the order of the pasuk, the order of the pasuk is first it talks about the carbon mincha. After it talks about the carbon mincha, it says v'achar yashka. Then you will give her to drink. So remember again, Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah said, what do you learn from here? That Allah Chalamaysa, mincha first, and then again, drinking afterwards. So now the Gemara elaborates on this drasha a little bit. Ela la'achar kala ma'asim kulan ha'amur lamala. So we'll say the Torah is coming to teach you, says Rabbi Shimon, that when does she drink? After all of the events described above. To which the Gemara says, Magid Gimel Dvarim Ma'akniba. It teaches us that Allah Chalamaysa, the woman does not drink until after three things have occurred. Okay, what are they? So we'll say number one, you don't drink until when? After your mincha has been offered. That's number one, until the kometz has been offered. Good. Number two, V'yachlo nimcha ka. You only drink when? After the parchment was erased. So the Gemara is going to say, that's kind of obvious because again, there's nothing to drink if the parchment hasn't been erased. Fine. The achelo tekabel aleha shvua. And ultimately, again, only after she's taken her oath. This goes back to yesterday's daf, right? Only after amen, amen, right? Only after she affirms. We'll also remember again, there are two parts to which the Sotah goes ahead and attest to her innocence. One is a declarative statement that she did not commit adultery. The second is a shvua that she takes, attesting to that she did not commit adultery. So we'll say, so Rabbi Shimon says she does not drink the water until three things have occurred. Number one, her mincha. Number two, the erasure of Parsha Sotah into the kli of water. And number three, her shvua. Her shvua. After those things have occurred, three things have occurred, then she could go ahead and drink the water. So let's analyze each of the three. So number one, her carbon mincha has to be offered up. Rabbi Shmuel Silber. Rabbi Shmuel goes according to his reasoning. The Amar makrives minchasa the achar kach mashke. So we'll say this is Rabbi Shimon of our Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon says mincha before drinking. Fine. And we'll say, by the way, the pasuk really supports Rabbi Shimon, right? Because just the straight reading of the pasuk indicates that first you're doing the mincha the achar yashkes hasota. Fine. Next. So that's number one. Number two, achlo nimcha ka megillah. So she can't drink until she goes ahead, until they erase the megillah, until they erase the parchment. The Gemara says, obviously, elamai mashkila. In other words, if you haven't erased the parchment, then what? Then what is she drinking? Amravashi lo nitzricha l'sheri shumon nikar. No. What does Rabbi Shimon mean when he says she could only drink if the parchment's been erased? I will say, remember again, Rabbi Shimon is coming to say, what about the following situation? Imagine you erase the parchment in the water, but what? Let's say the outline of the writing is still visible on the parchment. She can't drink the water until all of the writing is erased. That's the Chabal say. Remember again on Shabbos' daf, we spoke about the idea that remember again you have to use the type of ink that can be fully erased, right? Be fully erased in the water itself. So we'll say so when Rabbi Shimon says that she could only drink once it's been erased, what he means is erased means fully erased. Fully erased. And number three, she has to take the oath upon herself, right? She has to swear about her innocence. To which the Gemara says, "Mishtahu delo shasya ha michtav kasvila." So we'll see what you see here is something very interesting. What you see over here is according to Rabbi Shimon that Allah Chalamaysa, she can't drink until she swears. But if you wanted to write the parsha of Sotah before she swears, you could do that. In other words, Rabbi say it would seem to be that really, according to Rabbi Shimon, the ideal process would be like this, right? Go ahead, offer up the mincha, right? Part 1, right? Part 2, take your shavua. Part 3, write up parsha Sotah, and then again, part 4, erase it. That the writing ideally would be done. What the Gemara is saying over here is if you wanted to pre-write, right? If you wanted to write the parsha even before she took her shvuah, ultimately, again, you could do that. You could pre-write it a little. In other words, you're pre-writing it before she, you could do that. I have the Gemara, so 1 second. V'amar Rava, Megillah Sotah, shekasva kodem shetekabel aleh shvuah, lo asa v'lo klum. But 1 second, Rava said you can't do that. It's illegal. That's illegal. That you can't write Parsha Sotah until when? Until after she takes her oath. Now I will say, remember again, the Parsha of Sotah that's dissolved into the water has to be written l'shma. Right? In other words, we'll say, you can't walk into Shapsies and I'll take whatever, Benchers and Parsha Sotah. Say, in other words, that has to be written up l'shma for her. So Rabbi say, so this is fascinating. Rava said, therefore, Parsha Sotah can only be written up after she goes ahead and takes her shvuah. Then and only then. So Rabbi Shimon, what are you saying that you could write it up before she takes the shvuah? To which the Gemara says, Kedei Naspa. You're right, that shouldn't have been there. Rashi says over Kedei Naspa. I will say, last short line in Rashi, Kedei Naspa, Shalo l'tzorechta afilu michtav lo ksiksina. Right, you're right, take that out. Remove that. He didn't mean to say that you could pre-write it before the shvuah. Parsha Sotah can only be written after she takes her shvuah. So to which the Gemara says, therefore, both say, bottom line, we have a fundamental machlokes between Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanon in our Mishnah. Right? So we'll say, remember again, what are they arguing about? Specifically, again, the order of mincha versus drinking, right? The Rabbanon hold ultimately, again, drinking and then mincha. Rabbi Shimon holds mincha and then drinking. We now see, I will say, that Rabbi Shimon kind of has this expanded discussion as well of saying that really 3 things have to happen prior to the drinking. Number 1, the mincha, right? Number 2, the erasure, meaning complete erasure. And number 3, shvuah. To which the Gemara says, "B'may kamiflagi." So we'll say at the end of the day, what is the machlokes between Rabbi Shimon and the Rabban? I will say, look at Rashi for just a moment. This is first wide line of Rashi. Rashi is "B'may kamiflagi." Amasnisin kai. Ubraisa nakit bereisha lashmoinon mehecha yolef Rabbi Shimon tamei v'kavai rabbanon hashtayeri dashi. So we'll say, now let's go back to the root. What is the machlokes? Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanon. But my kamiflagi. So we'll say, here we go. So tzlosa kraiksiva. I will say in reality, there are 3 different phrases here. 3 different phrases. What are the 3 different phrases? Number 1, vihishka, the first vihishka, right? Number 2, the achar yashke, then you will give her to drink. And number 3, vihishka basra. So we'll say, in essence, fascinating. In Parashas Sotah, drinking is mentioned 3 times. The first vihishka, then again the achar yashke, and then a 3rd vihishka. So we'll say, 3 drinkings. So what do we do with this? So here we go. Rabbanan Savri, so the Rabbanan hold vihishka kama legufo. So the first vihishka, we'll say, teaches me what? Shemashke bi'achar kak makriv es minchasa. So we'll say, hishka number 1 teaches me that drinking comes before mincha. Right? Drink comes before mincha. That's number 1. Good. The achar yashke. Now we'll say the phrase, the achar yashke. Now we'll say, now remember again, here's what's fascinating. Where does the achar yashke appear? Where does it appear? In the pasuk of the mincha. The pasuk of the mincha, right? So va'achar yashke teaches me the sherishumo nicker. What does that teach me? That teaches me that if the parchment is not fully erased and an outline of the print is still visible on the parchment, she can't drink, right? The parchment has to be fully erased in order for her to drink. That's the va'achar yashke. And then v'hishka basra, what does the 3rd v'hishka teach me? Shemimcha kamegila va'omeres eini shosa. The third v'hishka teaches me that if after the parchment is erased, she says, I'm not drinking, then what's the halacha? Ma'arin osa umashka osa bal karcha. Ultimately, again, what? We force her to drink. Force her to drink. Rabbi will say, it's really fascinating. So now, this is beautiful. This is beautiful because now we begin to see how the drush really takes shape. So number one, first v'hishka teaches me drinking before mincha. Second, v'achar yashka teaches me parchment must be fully erased in order to drink. Third, v'hishka teaches me that if after the parchment was erased, she says, I'm not drinking, what do? Force her to drink. Beautiful, beautiful. Rabbi Shimon says, v'achar yashka. So Rabbi Shimon dashed a little bit out of order. He says, v'achar yashka legufo. Shemakriv es minchasa. V'achar kach mashke. So Rabbi Shimon says, first of all, let's go a little bit out of order over here. The phrase v'achar yashke, Rabbi Shimon says, let's darshan that in context. What's the context? Torah talks about offer up the mincha, v'achar yashke. Pashit pshat of that pasuk teaches me that what? Mincha and then drinking. Okay, that's number one. Mincha and then drinking. V'hishka kama. So remember again, I want to point out, Rabbi Shimon's drasha, you're going to see this is very interesting, is going out of order. He darshans v'achar yashka, which is really phrase number two. He's darshaning that first. What does that teach me? Mincha and then drinking. Okay, beautiful. Then v'hishka kama, the first hishka, what is that teaching me? Shem hishka v'achar kach hekriv es minchasa kshera. So the first hishka is teaching me that what? If you reverse the order and you drank first and then mincha second, b'diavad is fine. Okay. And then the hishka basra, the last hishka is teaching me, shemnincha ka megillah va'amra eini shosa ma'arin osa umashkin osa bal karcha. The third hishka teaches me that if halach l'maisa the parchment was erased, and what? She said, I'm not drinking. Ultimately, again, we force her to drink. Now, both say, what's beautiful about this? Everyone agrees on drasha number 3. Good. Okay, so let's take a vote. Everyone agrees that the hishka number 3 teaches me that's what? If they erased and she said, I'm not drinking, ultimately, again, we force her. So both say, let's zero in on the machlokes. According to the Rabbanan, first the hishka teaches me that's what? Drinking before mincha. The achar yashka teaches me that's what? That if you erased, but it's not fully erased, you can't drink. That's Rabbanan. Rabbi Shimon, I also remember again, Rabbi Shimon darshans 1 and 2 out of order. He darshans 2 first. The achar yashka teaches me that what? First mincha, then drinking. And then he darshans the hishka number 1 to teach me that what? If you reverse the order and you drank before mincha, b'diavad is kasher. Now, boss, and I watch this. The Rabbanan say, Rabbi Shimon, that doesn't make any sense. And I'll tell you why. The Rabbanan, b'diavad lo pasach kra. This is incredible. See, Rabbi say, according to Rabbi Shimon, the hishka number 1 is teaching me a b'diavad. Right? According to Rabbi Shimon, what does the hishka number 1 teach me? That if you drank before mincha, b'diavad is good. The Rabbanan say, why would the Torah open up with a discussion of b'diavad? That doesn't make any sense. That's why the Rabbanan choose to understand that the hishka number 1 is teaching the lechatchila. And what's the lechatchila? Drink before mincha. I know that comes out strange, right? Drink before mincha. That is a mantra for many, right? Drink before mincha. Anyway, so the Gemara says as follows: Rabbanan b'diavad lo pasach kra. So therefore, the Rabbanan ultimately disagree with Rabbi Shimon, because to say that the first v'hishka is talking about b'diavad case doesn't make sense. I have a sub Rabbi Akiva. So we'll say, fine. So we'll say, so this is beautiful. This is absolutely beautiful, because we'll say, now we understand the machlokes. Everyone is dashed. So we'll say, so by the way, what we have in Sotah is 3 phrases, 2 v'hishkas, 1 v'achar yashka. The order is important. It's v'hishka, v'achar yashka, v'hishka. Let's go through it once more. Rabbi Shimon. So let's just go in order. Rabbi Shimon, first v'hishka teaches me that if you reverse the order and you drink before mincha, b'diavad it's okay. V'achar yashka, mincha, and then drinking. Third v'hishka, that if you erase the parchment and she says, I'm not drinking that, what do? Force her to drink. Rabbanan, v'hishka number 1, l'chatchila, you drink before mincha. Right? Achar yashka teaches me, if you erase the parchment but did not fully erase it, right? You have to go ahead and make sure it's fully erased. And the Vihishka number 3, the third phrase, is if you erased it and she says, I'm not drinking, we force her to drink. Beautiful. Good. Here we go, Bosai. V'sav Rabbi Akiva, Mashkinos Abal Karcha. Now, Bosai, let's jump back for just a second. Does Rabbi Akiva hold that Allah Chalamaisa, if a woman says, I'm not drinking, and they already erased the parchment, that Allah Chalamaisa, we make her drink anyway? Does Rabbi Akiva actually hold that? Shabbos is fascinating. Vatanya, we learned. It's absolutely fascinating. Vatanya. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kalbus shal barzel matilin lesoch piha. Shabbos say they would have, it sounds pretty brutal, like they had this instrument in the Beis HaMikdash that would actually pry her mouth open. Shabbos, you know what it's like you know, when you go to the dentist and they mamish, it's torture, right? Again, right? Like they put that thing in your mouth, like to keep it open. I don't know what you call it. Torture device, right? And I think it's the technical term, right? Just to like pry it open. So apparently, again, the dentists have the raya from the Beis HaMikdash. Kalbos shel barzel. Right? So we'll say, so they had literally, again, this metal utensil, matin l'sokpia, that they put into her mouth, shemimcha megillah, va'amra eni shosa. That Allah Chalamais, again, if they erase the Megillah and she said, I'm not drinking, ma'arin oso mashkin oso balkach, we'd make her drink. So let's watch this. Am Rabbi Akiva, klum anu tzrichin lebodka, v'ala beduka va'omedes. So both say, this is incredible. Rabbi Akiva says, why would you make her drink? Rabbi Akiva says like this, understand. The whole point of the Meis Sotah, Rabbi Sotah, is what? To test her innocence. If she says, I'm not drinking, that's a pretty good indicator that she's guilty. So Rabbi Akiva says, why do you have to force it? In other words, what's the point of that? The whole point of this is to test. We always say, remember, the whole chap of Meis Sotah is we don't know what's going on over here. The waters are going to check her. If she says, I am not drinking, that is an incredible indication that halacha l'maisa, she is guilty. To which the Gemara is follow beduka v'omedes. Ella, we'll say first white line on the bottom. Ella, ad shelo karavak hometz yichola lachser ba. Up until the time that the mincha is offered, she could recant, she could retract. I don't want to drink. Remember again, this is reflecting the view of the Rabbanon. But once the mincha is offered, now we're going to see the Gemara just made an inherently contradictory statement, right? Because it sounded like, according to Rabbi Akiva, at what point in time could she say, I'm no longer drinking? When? Until when? Until any time. In other words, until she actually drinks, mincha was offered, mincha wasn't offered, she has the ability to say, I'm not doing this. I changed my mind, I'm not doing this. And Rabbi Akiva says, okay, mission accomplished, right? The water was supposed to check her. Essentially, again, she's effectively admitted guilt without drinking the water. Now the Gemara just said, by the way, as long as the mincha wasn't offered, she doesn't have to drink. But once the mincha was offered, she has to drink. So we'll note that contradiction in just a moment. To which the Gemara says, so the Gemara says, I don't understand. Tikshilacha hi gufa, mishakarav akometz in yachola lachser ba, follow beduka v'omedes. I don't understand. Based on what you just said before, it doesn't make any sense. Even once the mincha was offered, she should still be able to go ahead and say, I'm not drinking. Why? Because Rabbi say, the moment that a woman says, I'm not drinking, then again, that is effectively an admission of guilt. So even if the mincha was offered, what does it matter? Lokasha, so we'll say, listen to this, we'll stop over here. Actually, we'll say, I'll just read this and we'll stop. Lokasha, hadika hadra be machmas resisa, v'hadika hadra be machmas briusa. We'll stop here for today. We're going to pick up with this idea tomorrow. We're going to see that it depends why the woman is saying she's not drinking. Sometimes a woman says, I'm not drinking, and she strikes a strident tone. Other times, she says, I'm not drinking, and she's just scared out of her mind. We're going to see if she's just scared, that doesn't mean she's guilty. That could just mean she's scared. Sometimes when a woman strikes the strident tone in and of itself is reflective of guilt. So we'll say we'll stop over here today. I know we're kind of leaving off mid-sentence. We'll talk about this fascinating distinction tomorrow. Get to the resolution of the Sikha. We'll say, Shkoyach. All right, Chevron Zoom, have a great day, everyone. Jack, have a great day. Thank you. Hey, Shalom Aleichem. Good morning. Good morning.
It's a mouth prop.
I'm sorry, a mouth prop. Mouth prop.
Appropriate term.
Good to know. Mouth prop. No less torturous.